I always like to lead off with a bit of background about my materials and my teaching style. Normally, I'm focused on accommodating all 4 versions of Excel, but this presentation is a bit different in that we're going to immerse deeply just on the Office 365 platform and focus in on the features that have been added since Excel 2016 was released. So I won't be spending so much time on what you can't do in the other versions because pretty much everything I show you today will be all exclusive to the Office 365 platform. So if you are using one of those older versions of Excel, there's much that you're going to see that you won't be able to use in any other version of Excel, including the perpetual licensed versions of Excel 2016. That's what makes it confusing, because historically, we all had the same version of Excel, particularly if we had the same year version. If I had Excel 2010 and you had Excel 2010, then our Excel versions were identical. We're going to see that's different with Office 365. In fact, before we wrap up the presentation, I'll show you that on two of my computers, my Office 365 looks a bit different, and I'll explain why it does across those 2 computers. In any case, I will show you everything at least twice today. I'll first walk you through the PowerPoint slides, which are very detailed and have numbered steps, and then I'll go over to Office 365 and walk you through the features and techniques. The handouts for today, which hopefully you've been provided already, include a PDF of today's presentation as well as an example workbook that has most of the examples I'll be teaching from. So let's begin by determining if you have Office 365 or not. The first rule out is that you would have to be using Excel 2016. So if you're using an older version, that means that you don't have Office 365. But if you do have Excel 2016 and the top of your Excel menu looks much like it does for me, then to confirm that you have that versus a perpetual license is you could go to the File menu. Step 2, you could choose Account. And then step 3, over on the right-hand side of that account screen, you'll see something along the lines of the words subscription product. You might see the words Microsoft Office 365. And it may not be those specific words, but you will see Office 365. There are different flavors and different pricing platforms for Office 365. They are aiming at certain pricing platforms at corporate users and other platforms, other Office 365 platforms at home users. So in any case, you will see something along the lines of subscription product and then Office 365. That's how you know that you're using the Office 365 version. So historically, we always had to wait 3 years to get a new version of Excel. To have any new features or see anything significant change about Microsoft Excel, we had to wait for the next release to come around and purchase that release, and then we could get access to being able to do new things in Microsoft Excel. Office 365 changes all that because Microsoft is now pushing out updates sometimes as often as monthly. Now, it's not every month. Sometimes some months will go by and they won't push out any new changes. But when they do push out these updates, they appear on your computer automatically. They download automatically, and then suddenly you have a new feature, or in some cases, certain features are getting dropped out of the software. And so I'll show you how to restore those if there's a couple of them that I can point out that Microsoft has relegated to kind of the dark corners of Excel, but there is still a way to bring those back should you still need to use those versus the replacement there. So in my version, if I wanted to confirm that I'm using Office 365, I'd go to the File menu, I'd go down to the Account choice, then over to the right, notice it says Subscription Product and then Microsoft Office 365. So for me, I'm paying once a year for a license to use Microsoft Office. One of the benefits of this subscription platform is I can use this on up to 10 devices. So I can use it on 5 computers as well as 5 tablet computers. We contrast that with traditional software licensing. Many times, depending on the license, you can only use that license legally on a single computer. So even though you are paying on an ongoing basis, the pricing they've priced it attractively so that in general, if you're going to upgrade every year anyway, and if you have multiple computers, often tends to be cheaper to use the subscription platform anyway as well. So let's start digging into some of the new features, some of the new things that we can do in Office 365 that we can't do in other versions of Excel. And again, drawing a distinction by other versions, meaning even in Excel 2016 if you have the perpetual licensed version. So one recent change that they've added in recent months is the ability to deselect a range of cells. So in Excel, if you're highlighting a block of cells because you want to copy them or you want to format it or you want to do something to it, and then you accidentally or purposefully select more cells than you intended, in most versions of Excel, if you want to resize that selection, you have to start all over again. In the Office 365 version now, we have the ability to select a range of cells, and then if I want to exclude certain cells, I can hold down the Control key and, in effect, deselect one or more cells and adjust the selection in real time without having to start all over again. So I'm going to draw a contrast between Excel 2010 and Excel 2016 just so we can kind of work between the two. So let's say that I came along and I selected A1 through H20. And in reality, I meant to select maybe A1 through F15. In all versions of Excel except for Office 365, I would have to start over again. There's not a way to resize this selection here. Well, I guess I can resize this selection if I grab the handle there, but what I cannot do, notice I can kind of resize it that way and I guess resize it this way. But if I wanted to exclude certain cells from it, I wouldn't be able to. I'd have to start all over again to be able to pick that range of cells. So let's go back to Office 365. If we select, let's say, A1 through H20, one of the things I cannot do in the earlier versions of Excel is hold down the Control key and then perhaps remove that block of cells from the selection. So if I were trying to make this type of selection in Excel 2000, in all the other versions of Excel, I'd have to go about it a different approach. So meaning if I came along and I selected and then I wanted to carve out that block, I wouldn't be able to do that. Now what I would be able to do is maybe come along and select this block of cells and then hold down the Control key and then come along and select that. So I can get there, but I have to plan in advance. Versus in Office 365, notice we select, if we decided we selected too much, we can just hold down the Control key and adjust that selection on the fly. So that can save you a lot of frustration if you're spending time highlighting things and then realizing that you need to exclude certain things or just want to resize it. You can now easily do that by holding down the Control key as you adjust it. Another new feature that has been made its way into Office 365, and so a lot of these features in this particular presentation are going to be things that were not in the initial iteration of Excel 2016. So Excel 2016 came out 3 years ago, which would have been October 2015. And so all of the functionality that I'm showing you, these are things that have made their way into the Office 365 version by way of these monthly updates. And so they've given us an easier way to locate worksheet functions. Notice that the traditional way to locate a worksheet function is we would go to the Formulas menu, we click on Insert Function, brings up the Insert Function dialog box. We could type in the word ifs, and I'll talk about the ifs function shortly. That's one of the brand new worksheet functions that is available in Office 365, but is not available in any other version of Excel. So that's another thing we want to be mindful of is there are certain worksheet functions that have been introduced into Office 365 that Office 365 users can benefit from, but if they share the workbook with someone using a perpetual licensed version of Excel 2016, that perpetual licensed version won't recognize it and will treat it as if it's an older version of Excel. But if we're trying to locate worksheet functions and I go and I put in the word if or ifs and I click go, notice that the function box is going to show me two different functions. It's going to show me the ifs function and then the switch function. In reality, there's a number of other worksheet functions that have the letters IFS or ifs in their name there, and it would be hard for me to surface those by way of the Insert Function dialog box. So now, if we go to step 7 there, notice if most versions of Excel, if I typed in equals IF, so type in equals if, then I do get a little list that shows me worksheet functions that begin with the letters IF. And so that's long been an aspect of Excel. If you start typing the beginning of the worksheet function name, you'll get a list of all the other functions that begin with those same letters. What's new in Office 365 is it will also show you worksheet functions that have those letters anywhere in the name. So step 8 shows us that in Office 365, we type the letters IFS, then we get to see the ifs function, we get to see average ifs, count ifs, max if, min ifs, sum ifs. And so it's going to make it easier for you to not only find a worksheet function that you're maybe only remembering part of the function name, but also to be able to see related functions that maybe have similar functionality to make it easier for you to surface these other functions and take advantage of them. So for instance, if I go back to Excel and I'm looking for functions that begin with the letters IFS, I could either click the function wizard here, click insert function there, or go to the formulas menu and click the bigger version. Either one brings up the insert function dialog box. So if I type the word if and I click go, then notice it gives me a lot of functions that it thinks are perhaps related to the if function. So a lot of these have no relationship to the if function, but Excel shows them to me anyway. And so my point is that the insert function dialog box is often an ineffective way for searching for worksheet functions, particularly if you only know part of the function name. So if I type the letters IFS and then I click go, then the only two functions that surface are ifs and switch. So let's contrast that if we go and instead of going through the insert function wizard, we go to the worksheet. So I type the letters IF. Then I get to see if and if error and if NA and ifs. Now watch what happens, how this list changes when I add one more letter. If I add that I'm searching for ifs, then at that point, Excel offers to help me finish out the ifs function, but also shows me that there's also average ifs, count ifs, max if, min ifs, and sum ifs. And so this little subtle change makes it easier, particularly again if you're trying to work with a worksheet function that you use just infrequently enough that you can't quite remember the name of it exactly. You know part of it, and you know it when you see it. You'll have a much easier time in Office 365 by being able to just type a few letters. You'll get to see all the other functions that have the same letters in that, as opposed to just functions that have those letters at the beginning of their name. So I mentioned that Excel or Office 365 has added a number of new worksheet functions, and this next slide here will show us kind of an evolution of worksheet functions that have been added to Microsoft Excel over the years. So we see that in Excel 2007, there were a handful of new worksheet functions, and this is not by any means a comprehensive list. What I've eliminated is most of the more esoteric functions. I list some of those esoteric statistical functions under Excel 2010, but I've mostly focused on functions that the average user might find of interest. So any functions that were introduced in Excel 2007 are available for users in any subsequent version of Excel to use. So you can use if error across the board from Excel 2007 onward. It would not have worked back in the day in Excel 2003, which predated Excel 2007. But going forward, they all work going forward. So we see Excel 2007, there was a handful of new functions added, a few more in Excel 2010, a few more in Excel 2013. When Excel 2016 was first released, there were not any brand new worksheet functions added. So they kind of broke with tradition. Usually they add new worksheet functions to a new version of Excel. It gives us new ways to perform calculations in Excel. What they did is they waited until February of 2016, and they made these new worksheet functions available only for Office 365 users. So it's a subtle way of trying to encourage users to migrate to the subscription platform, because if you want the latest and greatest features in Excel, you have to subscribe. Otherwise, your version of Excel is frozen in time. And not necessarily anything wrong with that, but one of the challenges that we face is that if we were to use any of these worksheet functions in our spreadsheet that we're going to share with someone else, we now have to not only ask, okay, are you using Excel 2016? We have to get even more in the weeds and say, okay, are you using Office 365 or do you have a perpetual license? And most of us don't want to have to go there. We just want to be able to know in general what, because it used to be if you knew the year version someone was using, you'd know whether all the functions were compatible with their version or not. And so that's gotten much more granular now. So the new worksheet functions they've added are the concat function, which we'll look at. In fact, we'll look at all of these, the ifs function, max ifs, min ifs, switch, and then text join. So if you use any of these worksheet functions in a spreadsheet and you share that spreadsheet with someone that is not using Office 365, they will see a pound name error in their spreadsheet because none of the other versions of Excel know what to make of those function names. They're not aware of them, so that would cause a pound name error. So these functions we'll see can be very useful, but we have to be deliberate if we're going to use them in spreadsheets that we might end up sharing with someone else. So let's begin by looking at the concat function. It is an evolution of a function that's long been in Excel that's called the concatenate function. And when we use the term concatenating, what that simply means is that we're taking different segments of text, usually that are in different worksheet cells, and then combining them together. Now, the text we're combining together doesn't have to be in a worksheet cell. We can, as you see here, reference data that is in the not in a worksheet cell by putting it in double quotes. So concat is a way that we can go through and combine text together without having to retype it. So in this case, we're going to say equals concat, and we can say, okay, I want the data from cell A2. I then want to put a space in between there, and then I want to include the text from cell B2. We contrast that with the concatenate worksheet function, and on the surface, it may look like they do the same thing. Concat 1 is going to be easier to type, so we don't have to get our head around how do we spell the word concatenate. But also, if we go down to row 5, we're going to see that if we wanted to just take those cells and just jam them all together, we can reference a range of cells. We can say A5 colon B5. And historically, we couldn't do that. Historically, with the concatenate function, if we tried to say A6 colon B6, we would end up with a pound value error because the traditional concatenate function expected us to separate each piece of text into separate arguments by way of a comma. Now, if you've been using the concatenate function, that's a worksheet function that Excel or Microsoft could reach out and remove from Excel, and it would probably take me a while to notice that it's gone because that's not a worksheet function I ever use. And it's not that I'm not combining text together. I often have lots of needs to do that. But when I do, I use the ampersand instead. So we can say A4 ampersand, and then we can put a space inside double quotes, and then ampersand, and then B4. And so that will then allow us to combine text without using a worksheet function. So if we are combining text, the ampersand works in all versions of Excel, as does the concatenate function. The concat function will only work in Office 365. So let's contrast these different methods of combining text together. We'll start out with the concat function. So we can say equals concat. So we have the option to either separate each bit of text with a comma, or we'll be able to put a colon between there. But we'll start out with the traditional approach. So we're going to say A2, comma. I then want to put a space in between. So I'm going to put a double quote, a space, and double quote, and then type a comma. And then I can reference the third piece, which there is cell B2, close the parenthesis, press enter. And so let me pull up a tool here. And so that's what that formula looks like. Now, part of why we would want to use a worksheet function such as this is that we can pull this down, and notice we can combine all those different values together. Now, granted, I have the same text on every row, but in any case, if this were a listing of names, it would then combine them all together. One of the things we have to be mindful of when we're using functions like this is once we get the text combined together, we can look at column C and think our work is done. So we might come along and delete columns A and B. And if we do so, notice we end up with a pound ref error. So what we need to do in cases like that is before we delete the source data, we would need to come along, copy this to the clipboard, right-click, and then paste as values. So So we click our values icon, that then converts it to static text so that now it's no longer a formula. Now it's just the words George Washington. So we come along and we remove that, and then we see that the text remains in place. So that's the concat function that we can use exclusively in Office 365. If we want to create a formula that works in any version of Excel, then we have two different ways that we can go about doing that. We can say equals concatenate. And so this is the old function here. And then we put in double quotes, and then we say A, B3. And so that allows us to combine that text together. Now, notice I want to draw something to your attention. When I start typing concatenate, if you look, in fact, we get this list smaller there, there's a little yellow icon, a little yellow exclamation mark that shows up next to the word concatenate. That is a signal that from this point onward, concatenate is considered to be what Microsoft calls a legacy worksheet function, meaning that they are reserving the right to remove it from Excel at some point. Now, I doubt that they will, at least based on past history. There is functionality in Excel that goes back to the Lotus 1-2-3 days. And Lotus 1-2-3 has not been on the market for a number of years now, and there's still functionality that in Excel that's compatible with with Lotus 1-2-3. So it's not likely that they're going to take away the concatenate function at any point, but they are at least making noise that they're reserving the right to do so. So when you're working in Excel and you're typing a function name, if you see a little yellow exclamation mark, that means that it's on the endangered list, if you will, within Excel. So a different way to achieve the same effect here is we can just use ampersands and combine the text together that way. Notice, though, that if I wanted to, I could say concat and just select a range of cells, A5 through B5, and it jams it together. It doesn't give me an opportunity to put a space in the middle, but sometimes I just have data from multiple columns I want to string together into a single one. It gives me a much easier formula rather than having to peck out each individual cell reference. If I tried to do this with the concatenate function, then we'd find that we would just get a pound value error. So that's the rundown on the concat function and also where Microsoft is headed on and replacing some of these older functions, or at least staking out the turf that they're going to reserve the right to maybe pull them at some point. Now, another way that we can combine text together in Office 365 is a worksheet function that's called text join. And it's an alternative to concatenate. And what it allows us to do, notice it has 3 arguments. So there is a delimiter argument, and this is a character or characters that we enclose in quotes, such as a space, that we want to put between each cell. So we could put a dash there if we had different segments for an account number, and we wanted to create a combined account number that had, some numbers and a dash and numbers and a dash. We'd be able to use text join for that. Or we'd be able to use text join to combine names together without having to spell out, pick each cell. So the middle argument, the ignore empty, if we put the word true, that means if a cell is empty, it ignores it as if it's not there. If we put it false, then it would make a space for that. And then the text, we can put in up to 252 text arguments, or we can just do a range of cells, and so it gives us a different way to be able to combine text together. So we'll look at this from 2 different perspectives. Let's say that I had some numbers here like so, and we'll look at 2 different ways to combine text together. So what we saw was the concat function a moment ago. So I could say concat, and I could say this, and I could do that. And let's see, then I could do that, and then I could do that. And what I would end up with is I'd end up with 2 spaces in between because that first cell is empty. Now, a way around that then is I could use the trim function around the outside. That would get rid of the double space in the middle. But notice that's a lot of effort just to try to combine text together. We can contrast that with text join. With text join, I can just say that I want to put a space between each word or each cell. I want to ignore the empty cells, and then I want to combine these three cells together. And so I get a different, I achieve the same effect with a much cleaner formula. And in fact, on the first iteration, I had to go and use two different worksheet functions together. Then a lot of folks are not even aware of the trim function. So the trim function allows us to eliminate extraneous spaces in a string of words or a string of text. The trim function works in all versions of Excel, but it's one of those esoteric functions that you might not have run across on your own. Whereas text join eliminates the need for that. Down here, if I wanted to create a combined account number or phone number, whatever it might be here, I could just say text join, put a dash inside the double quotes and say ignore the empty ones, and then join those together, and that's what it would create for me. So that's the text join worksheet function. And so since I would most likely, I find that when I'm doing things like concatenating and joining text together, that's often so that I can get that new result, copy to the clipboard, and paste it as values. So it's less likely that you're going to be passing around workbooks that use the concat or text join functions. But the next function that we're going to look at is one that could easily get passed around. And this next function is the switch function. So what the switch function is designed to allow us to do, it's a decision-making function, and it's also a lookup function. So what we can do is we can create a series of items to look for. So with the switch function, we start out, the first argument is the expression cell. So we can say that we want to look at whatever's in cell A2. And then we have value 1. So we can provide up to 126 values. And so we're going to say we're looking for 10. So if cell A2 has the number 10, we want it to display the word oranges. If cell A2 has the number 20, if cell A2 equals 10, we want it to display the word apples. If cell A2 equals 20, we want it to display the word oranges. Otherwise, if there's some other value, we want it to display the word pound in A. Now, we'll contrast that with the VLOOKUP function. There is a way that we could use VLOOKUP in all versions of Excel to achieve something similar to the switch function. Now, normally when you're using VLOOKUP, you're accustomed to putting everything in a list of cells there. Notice that what switch lets you do is embed the list inside the formula. So there is a way that we could embed that list inside VLOOKUP as well. We'd put it inside curly brackets, which makes this inside be what's known as an array. So that would take that value and look for, if it found a match on 10, it would display apples. If it found a match on 20, it would display oranges. Otherwise, VLOOKUP returns pound in A. So let's contrast using the switch function with the VLOOKUP function. And so we can do this 3 different ways, actually. So let me show you kind of a traditional use of VLOOKUP. Let's say we put 10 and 20, do apples, we do oranges. So if over here, if I had the number 10, I could say equals VLOOKUP. And the first argument is a lookup value. So I'm looking for the number 10. Next argument is a table array. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to look at A1 through B2. So VLOOKUP is going to look down the first column. When it finds a match on that, it's going to travel across that row. And I have to then tell it, okay, on the row that you find a match, what column do I want to return a piece of data from? Well, in this case, I want to return data from column 2, so I put a 2 there, and then I put a false indicating that I want an exact match. So that's the traditional use of VLOOKUP, how folks when they learn VLOOKUP, the way that they would normally go about using it. Notice that we do have to take up space in the spreadsheet to put our list, and that does make sense when we have big lists of data. But sometimes in Excel, we have smaller lists. We might only have a couple choices. So instead of having to take up space in the worksheet, we can actually embed our list inside the worksheet function. So this won't make sense in every instance, but it can make sense in a lot of them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put in, we'll say equals switch. So the expression, that's what I'm looking for. So that's basically my lookup value. So what I'll do then is I'll say, okay, 10 is my first item, and if it finds the word 10, put in the word apples. 20 is my next item. If it finds oranges, if it finds 20, put in the word oranges. Otherwise, if it doesn't find a match, put the word invalid. And so I can provide up to 126 different options there. Now, if I have anywhere near, I mean, in my view, more than a few, then the switch function is probably not the best function for me to use. I probably want to use a VLOOKUP and look it up from a traditional list. But this is how I can use the switch function. So in this case, it finds a match on 10, so it displays the word apples. If I drag that down, it does not find a match on 11 because it's looking for an exact match, so it returns invalid. If I change this 11 to 20, then it would return oranges. If I change it to 21, it returns invalid, or if I put 11, then it's invalid. Now, contrasting that with VLOOKUP, if I wanted to do something similar with VLOOKUP, we'll start out with a 10 here. I could say equals VLOOKUP. Then instead of using up worksheet cells, I could put a curly bracket, and I could do 10, comma, the word apples, and then a semicolon. So that separates, in effect, the first row, and then 20, comma, oranges, and I could do 30, comma, bananas, and keep layering things out like that. I then close the curly brackets there. So for the table array argument, I'm putting a curly bracket at the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So that's the alternative. That's a way to do a lookup without having to actually store the data in a worksheet cell. And so then, because we've got a number and then a piece of text, the column index number would always be the number 2. Wouldn't need to be anything else, because all I need is a lookup value, a number to look up on, and then what to return. And then we'll put the word false for an exact match. So notice then that this is another way. So this VLOOKUP, in effect, is a universal way of recreating what the switch function does. So if you need the functionality of the switch function, but you're going to share the workbook with folks that are using older versions of Excel, then you can accomplish that. But note what will happen if it doesn't find a match, it's going to return pound in A. Now the way that we could then get around that is we could wrap the if error function around the outside so that, put in the word invalid, and take that and copy that up there. So what these new worksheet functions are doing, notice how much bigger, now even though I've got an extra choice in there, let me get rid of this extra choice so they're on the same footing. Actually, I'll put the other choice up here. We'll do 30 bananas, like so. So what the new functions are doing, generally they're letting us create cleaner, more efficient formulas. We don't have to involve the curly brackets. We don't have to wrap an if error function around the outside. So that's the switch function, which can be used to look up data from a predefined list. In other cases, we find ourselves needing to make decisions in Excel. And one of the most frequently used decision-making function is the if function, just the letter IF. In Excel 2007 and later, this is one of those not that you would but you could kind of things, you can nest together up to 64 levels of if functions. My general rule for myself is that if I find in any one formula that I find that I'm nesting more than 2 or 3 if functions, meaning putting one if function inside another one, if I'm doing more than 2 or 3, I usually stop and figure out, look at my data and say, okay, there's probably a more efficient way to accomplish this. And so that's part of the need for the ifs function, because with when we're nesting ifs, the if function on its own, we end up with a lot of extra parentheses and commas, and it's real easy to lose track of, did you nest everything together correctly? What the ifs function lets you do is you get to lay out up to 127 different logical tests. And so we can see that if A3 is greater than or equal to 90, display an A. Then we do our next logical test. If A3 is greater than or equal to 80, then put a B. A3 greater than or equal to 70, do a C, and so on. all the way to the end, when we get to our final test, we can put the word true and then what we want to display as a catch-all. So what I'm doing here, if I'm converting these numeric scores to a letter grade, then I can put up tests that handle an A, a B, a C, and D, and then I have a catch-all to just everything else is considered to be an F. And so that way I don't have to nest these worksheet functions together to make that decision there. So what that would look like in Excel here is if I'm trying to use the traditional if function, I can say if, and so I can say A2 greater than equal to 90. So that's my logical test. And so if that's true, I can put the letter A. If it's false, I could put something else, including an additional if function. So I could then say, okay, well, if A2 greater than equal to 80. Then I start that process over. Okay, if it's true, then we put a B. If it's false, what do I want to put? In that case, I put another if function. And so A2 greater than equal to 70. And then if that's true, I put a C. If that's false, then I do yet another if function. And you can see where you're building a house of cards in the formula bar. The more ifs that you're stringing together, the easier it is for things to blur, and then you leave out a character. And then sometimes you press the wrong key and you end up losing the whole formula and having to start all over again. Or sometimes you make a typo and you press enter and Excel offers to make a correction. It makes the correction, but then the function, the formula, doesn't actually return the result that you want. So nesting if functions is a very tricky endeavor because the more that you nest, the harder it is to test to make sure that your test is working in all the cases. So that's what the formula looked like if we were nesting a bunch of if functions together. Let's contrast that with the ifs function. So with an if function, we can say A2 greater than equal to 90, that's an A. And then I just say, okay, A2 greater than equal to 80. B, A2 greater than equal to 70. Put a C, A2 greater than equal to 60, do a D. And then I have my catch-all. So if it's not any of those, I put the word true to indicate that's my final test. And then my catch-all is the letter F. Now, in this case here, my A2s should have been A3. So change those to A3. So notice that this formula, this bottom formula, is easy to check. So we have a test, a result, a test, a result, a test, a result. Whereas here we have a test, we have a result, and then we have to embark, okay, wait, no, there's another test, and then a result, and then there's another test inside that one. And when we're nesting if functions, it can be kind of like taking two mirrors and facing them to each other where they reflect into each other into infinity. Those types of functions are really tough to troubleshoot if something doesn't work right and make sure that you've tested all the different permutations. If we're just converting letter grades, that's pretty straightforward. But if we're using it in an actual business spreadsheet where we're having to have the formula do different calculations based on different conditions, the more ifs that we layer in, the harder those get to audit. So the if function is one that you can only use in Office 365, and so you should only use it if you're certain that you're not going to need to share the spreadsheet with someone using any other version of Excel. We're now going to look at the max ifs function. Excel has long had a max function, and the max function lets us pull the highest value from a list of numbers. The max ifs function allows us to pull the highest number based upon up to 127 criteria. So that's a worksheet function. That's a capability we didn't have before. We could pull the very largest value, but if we wanted anything more esoteric, for instance, if I wanted the largest value for the north region, or even worse, if I wanted the largest value for the north region just of apples, it'd be much more difficult to write that formula. Now, in a moment, I'll show you a way that you can create a formula that can get the max or min function to work like this across all versions of Excel. Well, let's first see the max ifs function and contrast it to the max function on its own. So what we'll see here, wrong version of Excel. Let's get the right version going here. What we'll see here, if I just want the very largest value, then in any version of Excel, I can go and point it to a range of cells, and that is the largest number. So the largest number there is 499. So the max function looked at this range of numbers, pulled the very highest value. What max ifs lets us do in Office 365 is pull the largest value based on criteria. So I have a max range, so I tell it where to look. Then I can provide up to 127 criteria. So first I'm going to tell it the criteria range. So this is going to be where the regions are, so A2 through A9, and then the criteria, in this case, will be the word north, because I want the largest value in the north region. And so we can see that 436 is the largest value in the north region. What if I want to get even more specific? I want the largest value in the north region just of apples. What that formula would look like would do max ifs. I would say C2 through C9. Then I'm looking at A2 through A9. So I then look for whatever's in cell E7. Then my second criteria range would be the product column. So now also, in addition, look at the product column for the word apples. And so notice the result we get is 373. So it looks at this list, looks at, it pulls out just apples for the north region. That's the highest value. So that's what the max ifs function lets us do, is not only pull the highest value, but be more deliberate, more purposeful about it. We can say, okay, I want the largest value not for the entire list, but based on up to 127 criteria. The min ifs function works in a similar fashion here. So min would pull the smallest number, min for minimum versus max for maximum. So we can do min ifs, and we can pull the largest value for the smallest value for the north region. We can pull the smallest value of pairs for the north region. Now this last formula here, and it's also at the bottom of the screen here, shows how you could coerce the min function to work like a min ifs in any version of Excel. Now this might be a little bit mind-bending for some folks, because we're going to do an extra step. When we enter this formula here with the if functions inside it, when we get done typing the formula to get it to work, we cannot just press the enter key like we usually do. So you're conditioned, and you've got some muscle memory around when you type a formula in Excel, you press enter, and then that's it. The formula is in that worksheet cell. This type of formula that we're putting the if functions inside the min function, this is what's known as an array formula. So we're getting Excel to do something it wouldn't normally do. And to activate this hidden power that we have here, we have to hold down the control key and the shift key together and then press the enter key. So when we do control shift enter, that then enters that formula. It becomes an array formula. And so that then gets it activates that hidden functionality. So if you just press enter when you type out that formula, you're not going to get the result you're looking for. It's when you do control shift enter that it gets it to do exactly what you want. So just a quick run through here. If I wanted the smallest value for my list, I could say min and get those values there. So that's my smallest value. If I want the smallest value for the north region, I can do min ifs. So I can tell it to look at this range of numbers based on this region column, looking for that particular region. And so notice it pulled 243 because that's the smallest number for the north region alone. If I want the smallest number of pairs in the north region, then I can say min ifs Here's my range. Here's my criteria, where there's my north region. Come along here, looking for the word pairs. I could just keep stringing more functionality in there. That's the number it pulls. So if I want the equivalent of min-ifs or max-ifs to work in any version of Excel, I type either min or max, and then I'm going to say if, and I'm going to say A2 through A9 equals E6, or in this case E10, and then I will do another if inside that, and I'll say B2 through B9, where it's equal to F9, and then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to then list the range of numbers there. So I need to close the initial if, and then I need to close the second if, and then I need to close the min function. So if I press enter, it gives me a pound value error, which might make me think that I've goofed up or I can't get there from here. But if I go back in and I edit the formula, I hold down the control key, the shift key, and I press the enter key, then it activates this hidden functionality, and then the formula works. So if you're using a non-Office 365 version of Excel or want compatibility, you want this functionality to be able to do this type of calculation, but you don't want to use min or max ifs, that is the way that you can accomplish that. And so you could just keep stringing more ifs together in a similar fashion if you had more than 2 criteria that you were checking for. So that's a rundown on the worksheet functions that are available in Office 365 that are exclusive to Office 365. Later this year in October, Excel 2019 will come out. And so when Excel 2019 is released, anybody that's using Excel 2019 will then catch up. They'll be able to use all those worksheet functions I just shared with you, even if they have a perpetual license. But what will likely happen is the process will start all over again. Once Excel 2019 is released, Office 365 will keep marching on, and yet more functionality will get added to the Office 365 version that in turn won't be compatible with Excel 2019. So that's where Microsoft is headed. They're not going to force us to subscribe. They sure are going to entice us, though, by creating more and more stumbling blocks or more and more incompatibilities if you're not using the subscription version. So let's now switch gears and take a look at a feature in Excel that's known as pivot tables. Pivot tables are a report writing tool that we can use to create reports from data that we have in Excel. I ran across a startling statistic to me recently where apparently there are 750 million Office users around the world. And according to Microsoft's research, 80% of those users have never used a pivot table. So if you've never used a pivot table, there is a feature that helps you get a running start with that. It's available in Excel 2013 and later. It's called recommended pivot tables. So you could have a list of data. You could then go to the insert menu and then click recommended pivot tables. That will bring up an artificial intelligence feature that's labeled recommended pivot tables. It looks at your data set and then it suggests different reports that you might wish to create from that data set. So you can double click a selection and that will then create a pivot table on the screen for you. So I'm going to briefly introduce the concept of pivot tables, and then I want to show you, for those of you that have experience with pivot tables, a new capability that we only have in Office 365. So if I'm brand new, or even if I have experience with pivot tables, if I have a list like this that I want to transform into a report, what I can do is go to the Insert menu and click the Pivot Table command, the Recommended Pivot Table command. When I do so, Excel goes and says, okay, well, you might want a report that says sum of cases sold by region, or you might want to count the total sales by region, or count the total sales and cases sold, the sum of cases sold, or total sales by region. So notice that we work our way down. As we get down to the bottom, we can see that there's sum of cases sold by vendor and product. So if I were to click OK, I get this instant report. Along the side here is a field list, and I could use to amend that report. So for instance, I could take the city field and drag it down in between region and vendor and add another dimension. So that would then let me see, okay, total sales by region, by city, and then by vendor. Other things I could do is I could take the product field and I could drag it down over here into rows, and that would amend the report. So now I've got region, city, vendor, and then I've got the products listed. But I could also take the region, I could drag it this way. And so what pivot tables let us do is create reports by dragging and dropping things around in that field list. So that's just a quick overview of what's possible with pivot tables, and I share that to set the stage for the next feature I want to bring to your attention in Office 365, which is the ability to establish defaults for pivot tables. So historically, when we created a pivot tables had amnesia. If there were any specific customizations that we wanted to make or any settings we wanted to always use with a pivot table, we would always have to go back in and make those changes on every single pivot table that we created. Starting with Office 365, if we go to the File menu, and then step 2, we go to the Options command, that brings up our Excel Options dialog box. So step 3 there shows a data section that most versions of Excel don't have. That data section, we click on that. Notice step 4, there's a choice that says make changes to the default layout of pivot tables. So step 4, if I click that, edit default layout, this gives me a new dialog box where I can then tweak various aspects of the pivot table feature, and those tweaks will then affect any new pivot tables that I create going forward. And so that's going to eliminate a lot of repetitive work that's been involved around pivot tables. They give us this great running start where we get a report kind of built for us, but then we have to go back over and over again if we wanted to change the position of the grand totals or the subtotals or change other aspects of pivot tables. So if you're working with pivot tables a lot, then this ability to set these default settings will be particularly useful to you. To see that particular setting there, if we go in Excel to the File menu, and then we come down to the Options command, puts us inside our Excel Options dialog box. If you're using Office 365, you will have a Data section. So that's new. That's brand new to Office 365. And so here we have a choice for make changes to the default layout of pivot tables. We click on that. And so we can import an existing layout if we want. We could change the positions of the subtotals, whether we want those or not, whether we want to have grand totals, which particular report format we want to be our default, if we want a blank line after each item. If we click pivot table options, then we get even more choices that we could make. So for instance, on a one-time basis, we could go in here, we could click that checkbox that says refresh data when opening the file, and what that would do is whenever we open up our workbook, it would automatically force the pivot table to recalculate, which normally pivot tables don't do that. Pivot tables work on a snapshot in time of the data. So unlike formulas that recalculate automatically when the underlying data changes, pivot tables do not. You have to right-click on the pivot table and choose refresh, or use a refresh command from the data menu or pivot table menu. And instead, if we just click that checkbox on, then going forward, all of our pivot tables would be set to refresh themselves when we open the workbook. So that way we always start out on a good footing there and know that we're seeing a newly calculated pivot table there. So that's what we can do with our pivot table options if we choose to in Office 365. Now, this next feature I'm going to show you is brand new, meaning in the last month or so that Microsoft came out with this particular feature. And this feature is called Insights. And so if you have a list of data, such as I just showed you a moment ago, you can select any cell within a list of data. Step 2, you can go to the Insert menu. Step 3, you'll go to the Insights command. That will bring up an Insights panel. And this is another artificial intelligence feature. We're going to be seeing more and more of these AI features showing up in Excel. And basically what this AI feature does is it goes through and analyzes our data, and it points out what it considers to be different variances or different anomalies in our data. So it's a way to have Excel kind of have your back and just kind of bring things to your attention that you might overlook within a big sea of data. Now, if I go to Excel on this particular computer here and I go to the Insert menu, not going to find the Insights command. So that's why I'm going to switch to my other computer here. And I want to point out something else here. On this other computer that I'm using here, let's see, you're going to hide. No, we'll just leave that one. Notice how the menu looks a bit different. This is a preview of what the Excel menu is going to look like in Excel 2019. Basically what they've done is they've freshened the look. So if we go back to the home menu here and we contrast it with the home menu here on this other computer, notice that the icons look a little bit different. Everything in the same place, just the font's a little different and the pictures have been refreshed here. And the reason that on two different computers in the same office I've got two different versions of Excel is one of the other things that Microsoft is doing is they're pushing out these updates at different rates. So not just because you're using Office 365 doesn't mean you're going to get the update on the same schedule as everyone else. Particularly some corporate users, the IT team gets to really control when the updates get pushed out, so there could be as much as a 6-month delay. But in any case, that's another thing I wanted to point out is that we're all getting updates on a different schedule here. But let's take a look at that Insights feature. So let me open up a file that would be suitable for that. And so if I go to the Insert menu, here is my Insights button. So I have it on this computer. I don't have it on the other computer. If I click on that, the first time that I run it, I have to give Microsoft permission to send my data to the server. And so it does, and so it says I'm not signed in. Let's see, I thought I was signed in. All right, in any case, don't remember my Microsoft password, so I'm not going to head down that path. But rest assured, what the Insights feature does is, notice that in this case it created 34 different little charts here. And so any of those charts I wanted to keep, I could click Insert Pivot Chart. That would then add a little chart, a little dashboard onto my spreadsheet so I could then keep track of these things that Excel has brought to my attention. So going forward, we'll see a lot more of these artificial intelligence-based features like that. Now, there is another feature that hasn't made its way to me yet, not even in my version of Excel that is a little bit ahead of the curve here. And another feature that we're going to be seeing in Excel 2019 is a Forms feature. And what this Forms feature is going to allow us to do is to create web-based forms that users can then fill in by way of their web browser, and any changes, any inputs that folks put in the form will then appear in our Excel spreadsheet. So you might have used some similar functionality if you've used Google Docs, where Google Docs will let you create an online form and then the data goes to a Google Docs spreadsheet. We're soon going to have that same functionality in Microsoft Excel, where a interface will allow us to build an online form, make fields required, have drop-down lists and all that. So we'll have this new form building interface. And then the results will automatically get written to an Excel spreadsheet. That Excel spreadsheet will have to reside on Microsoft's OneDrive service, which is their cloud-based storage service, their storage platform, but that would give you the ability to create new forms. Also, another new feature that's been added, I'll bring your attention, this one just came out in the last week, just to show you how dynamic Excel is, or Office 365 is. I've got a spreadsheet here that's got some comments in it. At the top of my screen there's a comments panel. So if I click on that, it brings up a comments panel on the screen over here. And this is designed to foster collaboration. Notice it says David made a comment, that would be me. I could then reply to that comment. Now, looks like I'd have to go and convert. This feature's new enough that I haven't even tried to use it yet. So if I convert my comments, so okay, that converted into the new format. So then I could go in and say, yes, I agree, or whatever. So basically, we're going to be able to have threaded comments so that if we either turn on the comments panel or if we hover over it, notice that's how the comments are going to then get stacked. And so that's another change that's happening there is instead of having to go cell by cell, we'll have a master comments panel there, and then we can reply to those comments. And so it's kind of like you can create a conversation inside the spreadsheet, and that's brand new. We've had the ability to go in and edit comments, but that could kind of start to blur on who said what. Notice here it'll be real clear exactly who said what in a given, given part of the spreadsheet. There is a couple of new types of charts that have been added to Office 365. One of them is known as a funnel chart. And so a funnel chart is designed to help you show things kind of in perspective, maybe a sales pipeline or kind of ranking sales, whatever that might be. So if I took some fruit sales there and I selected any cell within my list, I want to make sure that it's sorted in ascending or descending order. On my insert menu, I could choose insert waterfall or stock chart from that insert menu, or I could go to recommended charts. I'd then be able to choose to create a funnel chart, and that would put that funnel chart on the worksheet. So it just kind of lets you see on a sense of scale how much bigger certain numbers are versus others. That particular type of chart, though, is only visible in Excel, only visible in Office 365. If you create that chart and send it to anybody using any other version of Excel, including the perpetual licensed Excel 2016, all they'll see is a placeholder. This chart isn't available in your version of Excel. So nice functionality, but also limited to a subset of users here. So if I wanted to create that funnel chart, I could click anywhere in my list, go to the insert menu. There's a command that says insert waterfall, funnel, stock, surface, or radar chart. So if I click that, I can then choose to create a funnel chart. So that would be my funnel chart, but again, I could only share that with other Office 365 users. Anyone else would just see some placeholder text. I also have the ability to create map charts in Office 365. And so to do so, if I select any cell that has geographic data, so it's going to need to include cities and states or countries, something geographic. Step 2, if I choose maps from the insert menu, first time around I'll be prompted to accept that it's okay to send my data to Bing, which is Microsoft's search engine. And as long as I agree to that, I'll then get a map chart. And if I hover over a given state, I'll be able to see the underlying numbers. And so it color codes it. So the more blue the state is, the bigger the numbers are. The lighter the shading is with the state, the smaller the numbers are. So that type of chart would look like this here. What we would do is pick our list of data, go to the insert menu, click on maps, and so we want to create a filled map here. And so there is our chart, our map. If I hover over Texas, that shows me the value, Oklahoma, Kansas. As I hover over these various states, then I get to see what the underlying numbers are. This, too, is a chart that can only be viewed in Office 365. For instance, if I took this and I saved it to my desktop, tried to pull it up in Excel 2010, I'm going to see that same placeholder text there. So we'll just try that real quick. And bring up our map chart. Notice that's what it says. This chart isn't available in your version of Excel. Editing this shape or saving it will permanently break the chart. So nice to have this functionality, but still going to be for a limited audience because lots of folks are still using the perpetual licensed versions of Excel. We do have the ability in Excel to, and this as an accountant, I'm not sure where I would ever use this functionality, but Excel does get used in a wide variety of industries. You can import 3D models into Excel, you can then rotate them as well. So if we go to the Insert menu, step 2, we can go to 3D models. We can either pull in a file that we have, or we can choose from online sources. We can search if we want. Notice if you wanted to put a bug in your spreadsheet, you literally could put a bug, and then you'd be able to rotate that bug. 3D objects, the picture can be seen in older versions of Excel. They will be static though. Anyone using a non-Office 365 version will not be able to rotate the image. They would just see it the way it is on the screen. But in Office 365, you would be able to rotate that image. So what I'm going to do here, let me go ahead and insert this one from the beginning. We go to the Insert menu, and then in the Illustrations section, here is 3D Models. Click on that. And we'll go down here to Nature, go to Bugs. Various bugs we could choose from. So we'll just pick this ladybug. We'll choose Insert. And so feels a bit whimsical to me to be able to bring in a bug and rotate it, but that is functionality that has been added so that we can work with 3D models. So that seems to be thinking there. So I'm going to let that sit for a minute and think and move on and show you another thing we can do, which is create emojis in our spreadsheets. So we can use emojis on our cell phone, and emojis are starting to take over the world as a communication vehicle. And so we have similar functionality in Excel. If we go to the Insert menu in Office 365, we go to Icons. We then can choose an icon and insert that into our spreadsheet. So the icon floats above the spreadsheet and can be moved or resized. These icons, I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure they will be visible in the older versions of Excel. So we'll check that in just a moment here. Back to our 3D image. Notice I'm able to take this 3D image and rotate this inside the spreadsheet there. So if you have a situation where you've got, using 3D software of some sort, then you can embed that shape into the Excel spreadsheet and send it along as part of that document. So I wanted to create an emoji. If I go to the Insert menu, under Illustrations, there's a choice for icons. And so wide variety of these. We'll go to the Nature and Outdoors, and again, we'll add a bug to our spreadsheet. We'll click Insert. So here is our bug. If we were to take this and then save it to our desktop, in the older version of Excel, if I pull up Excel 2010, I think we'll find that the bug can be viewed. So yes, you can view it. You wouldn't be able to modify it, but you would be able to view it. Conversely, in Office 365, when we click on the bug, there's a format command. We'd be able to change the color of it, different things like that. Now, what do you do if you have users that are using an older version of Excel and you want them to be able to, they need to be able to see a spreadsheet that is using some of this new functionality? There is a possible way, there are a couple constraints we need to be aware of, but there is a free online version of Excel. Has a very unfortunate address. You would think that Microsoft would have given us a cleaner address, but if you go to office.live.com/start/excel.aspx, if you sign in with a free Microsoft account, then you can open, there's a version of Excel that exists in your browser. To open files, though, those files have to be either saved to OneDrive or Dropbox. So you won't be able to save it to your hard drive. It has to be a file that's either the file has to be in the cloud, meaning in the OneDrive service or on the Dropbox service. The other thing we'll find is that the workbook cannot exceed 5 megabytes in size. But as long as you can fit within those constraints, save the file to OneDrive or Dropbox, and it's less than 5 meg in size, then anybody could open up this workbook and you'd be able to see a map chart or a funnel chart or use a 3D image and use all this functionality. So that's something to keep in mind. If you create a spreadsheet and you're in a jam and you need somebody to be able to use a spreadsheet that's using these exclusive features, they might be able to get to that from their browser. So Diane has a question about the functionality between Excel Online versus the desktop version, and when you open a file in one version versus the other. These workbooks are designed to go seamlessly between the two different platforms. Now, with the online version, the Excel Online, there are constraints. So it is going to check your file. If the file is more than 5 megabytes in size, the online version will refuse to open it. If the file contains any macros, the online version will, I believe, it refuses to open it. So the online version is protective, and so there's not anything you would do in the online version that would not translate to the desktop version. There are things that you can do with the desktop version that you wouldn't be able to open the file with the online version. So that's really the only consideration. You're not going to damage the file. If it won't work in the online version, then Excel Online will tell you, and so then you're not going to get stuck there. The other thing about it being on a cloud-based service is both OneDrive and Dropbox version the file. They keep track of the different versions, and you'd be able to go back to an older version of the file. If in the remote chance that you lost any functionality, both services are archiving multiple copies of the file, so you'd be able to go back to an older version. So you do have a safety net. I really don't see any risk in opening a file in the online version. Either the file will work online, or if it won't, then you'll be notified, and then you'll have to go a different route. Now, one of the frustrating parts about Office 365, it is kind of nice when new functionality shows up in Excel, like the Insights feature and when this Forms feature shows up. What's frustrating is when suddenly commands that you've used for the longest time vanish. And that's happened with regard to sharing files. So historically, on the review menu, if we look down in the bottom right-hand corner there, on the review menu, we used to have a command for share workbook. We used to have protect and share workbooks, and then track changes. In Office 365, all those different versions will vanish, or all those different commands are no longer a part of the menu. Now, we can bring them back, as I will show you. So Microsoft, when they are taking things away, they're just kind of moving it down to the basement. And I'll show you how to find Excel's basement so that you can surface these commands again. But the ability to share workbooks historically required that the workbooks be on the same network. So if you were on the same network, you could share work files with your coworkers. But now with Office 365, you can share a workbook with anyone around the world because that sharing happens in the cloud. The caveat is those files that you want to share do have to be saved to your OneDrive account. If you do save a file to your OneDrive account, then 2 or more users can edit a shared workbook simultaneously. You can even see what changes the other person, what cells the other person is working on. Also, on the File menu under Open, there's a listing of the files that have been shared with you. So they're really trying to encourage us all to save our documents in the cloud, and they're really also trying to facilitate collaboration by making it easy to bring others in on sharing our data. Now, there is an autosave command that if you are saving a document, if you have shared it and that document's on OneDrive, autosave turns itself on automatically. And what that does is it saves virtually every change that you make. Now, I'm not going to say it saves every single change that you make, but every few seconds it creates another copy of the file, which is good and bad because there's been lots of situations over the years where I open up a workbook, I might work on it for an hour or more and then realize I have totally headed down the wrong path or I've totally goofed up that file. I want to close it and start all over again, and I'm willing to do that. But if Excel is saving every single change as I go, that becomes much harder to just go back to where the file was. But all those different copies are time-stamped, and so it will be a little bit more effort. You can turn that autosave off if you don't want it saving it. Of course, if you're sharing the file, I think you do want the autosave turned on so that your changes will get saved. With regard to bringing commands back from the basement, if you wanted to use the traditional track changes or share workbook commands, you can add them to your quick access toolbar. So if we go to the menu at the arrow at the end of the quick access toolbar, step 2, we go to more commands. Step 3, we'll choose commands not in the ribbon. And we can then go and search, and so we can find track changes, we can find share workbook and all that. Notice these are tagged legacy, so those are on the endangered list. There is a chance at some point Microsoft might decide to pull that functionality out of the software, but presently those features, if you add them to your quick access toolbar, then you can still use those traditional commands in the fashion that you used to. So Diane had another follow-up that the online version isn't as sophisticated as the desktop version, and so it won't let you group lines or merge cells, it looks like, and copy and insert. I honestly have not spent a whole lot of time in the online version of Excel because its feature set is very limited. And when you just look at the menus, you're going to see that you're only getting a tiny subset of the functionality. So in my view, the online version of Excel, also I don't want to save all my files to the OneDrive service. That's just a philosophical issue with me. So I consider the Excel online version to be more of a, kind of a workaround if you want to share a spreadsheet that uses new features with someone using an older version of Excel. I don't see it as a viable go-to version of Excel to try to save on having an Office license. So let's look at a couple of quirks about Office 365. When these features get rolled out, sometimes they appear and then they disappear. And an example of that was a couple months ago, or a few months ago now, it's been a few months. One day Microsoft put this help menu in Office 365. It was in my version of Excel for a few days and then it vanished. And then a few days later after that it came back again. So we're not in the space that we're used to be where Excel was in effect etched in stone. You're going to see more and more features kind of come and go without notice, appear and disappear, and then maybe appear again. So just be prepared for that. That's just the state of the software now where it's subject to change without notice. A quirky thing that you may have encountered is if we go to the File menu, in Step 2 we go to Open, Step 3 we go to Recent, what you should see is a Folders link over there. Because what happened is when they first came out with Office 365, they gave us a way to see recent workbooks that we've worked on, but they neglected to give us a link, a screen to see the folders that we've been in recently as well. So let me show you what that looks like here. If we go to the File menu and then we go to Open, here's Recent. Notice I have recent workbooks and I have recent folders. But a lot of users don't have that folders link. That's one of those things that was added. It was the technical term is called slipstream, where when they have software and then you just kind of slip a new feature in through an update. So they kind of slipstreamed this folders link in there. But depending on your schedule for getting these new updates, it's possible that your version of Excel doesn't have that folders link. So if you're missing that folders link or missing any other functionality, if you go to the Account menu, you can choose Update Options and say Update Now and try to get that to force your version of Excel to update. If that doesn't work, then if you're in a corporate environment, then you may need to go to the IT team and just ask them to please get you a newer build of Excel so that you can catch up on that feature there. Because again, some organizations are on a semi-annual channel. That means that delays these new improvements as much as 6 months. If you want to be able to see to be privy to new things, the very newest and very shiniest things that are available in Excel, there's a free program that's called the Office Insider program. If you go to the File menu, if you choose Account, you'll see an Office Insider button that you can use to subscribe to speed up these new builds of Office. That is, you are going to be beta testing new functionality, so be mindful of that. But if you're willing to do so, then that can get you early access to that. That is why my work computer that I primarily work from is at a different pace than my teaching computer. I've purposely had my teaching computer on a slower pace for getting these updates, and I have my work computer on a faster pace. That's all managed by way of the Office Insider program there. It is free, and you can decide how aggressive you want Microsoft to be on pushing out these new updates. Microsoft is very interested in our feedback, and so they've built in this feedback mechanism for us to be able to speak our mind. That's why you'll see in the upper right-hand corner a little smiley face in Excel. So you can click that, or you can also go to the File menu and then choose Feedback. You can tell it that you can send a smile that you like something, that you don't like something. Also, there is this I have a suggestion. And Microsoft has a website. It's called User Voice. And that's where you can go and say, I really wish Excel would do X, whatever X might be. And in fact, you can also go there and you can look and see if other people are wishing for that same thing. They are actually using that User Voice site to triage new features being added to Excel. If enough people vote on a new feature, they go ahead and move that up in the development cycle, and then it gets rolled out sooner rather than later. So if there's something that you've just really wished for a long time that Excel, there's something you would like to see changed about Excel, if you either go through this send a suggestion, or if you go and search the User Voice website, you'll see that you can indeed have a vote on new improvements to Excel.